All right, welcome everybody. If you're just joining us, we have about 29 participants and definitely need to let our teammates know that we have an amazing speaker for the day today. So make sure you are sending out your texts or emails and even making phone calls to make sure your teammates are on this call so they don't miss this training. So I'd like to introduce our speaker. Our speaker for the day is Christion Sadler. And, before getting started with Renatus, Christion was actually in quite a bit of financial scarcity. He had a daily wage job in steel fabrication, and around this time, he had just heard about real estate and the wealth opportunity and income generation activities that it generated. So he started attending different guru events, but really felt like he was spinning his wheels and not finding the right opportunity and environment which he could get nurtured in. And eventually he did find Renatus, just like a lot of us did. And he started getting around people within the community that he wanted to be like. He was showing up early and volunteering and helping out wherever he could. And because of his persistence, Christion has now been in the real estate business for, over 14 years. He's done multiple real estate transactions that have netted over 7 figures. He's a marketing leader, a PIT team member, one of the founding team members of Elevate. And, we're fortunate enough to have Christion with us here today. So without further delay, I'd like to bring Christion Sadler on the line. Hey, Christion, how are you today?
I'm great, Abby. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
Good. Hey, thank you, Abby, for everything that you do and continuing to start these calls off with a bang. And you do it very professionally. I love how right at the top of the hour you give us some solid content from Bob Snyder, followed by those Money Matrix videos. And there's a lot of value that comes from being able to start our day with that type of information. And so, one second, I'm gonna get rid of a couple of my tabs here so they don't make any noises. And I want today to talk about funding. And specifically, a compliant way to help people find the funding. And so the key is, you don't want to cross the line of becoming a financial planner. You don't want to be, meddling in somebody else's finances to the point that if they don't follow through and they're looking for somebody to blame, that, that it looks as if you were giving them financial advice per se. Right? And so instead, a really good way to do it is just to simply share the ways that you've seen other people find the funding. And so typically where this comes up for me is I've gone through a follow-up with somebody and we're sitting down and we're talking about the 3 phases to getting into your first deal. I've asked them the question of how fast do they want to get through their first deal, and I've told them, hey, some people call me a mentor, but I really don't like to use that word. I think of myself more as a guide. So, I'm not here to teach you every step. I'm just here to help guide you along the way and make sure that you have access to the tools and the resources, that Renatus provides. And so, can you see yourself getting started with us? Are you ready to get started with us? And many times that's when the conversation comes up, which is that they want to get started, but they don't know how they're going to fund it, right? They don't know where the funding is coming from. And so usually I'll start off this conversation and I'll say, listen, before we talk about how you're going to fund it, you've got to make the decision if you're going to get started. Because here's what I find. Many people confuse the am I going to do it decision process with the how am I going to do it decision process. And the fact of the matter is, until you make the decision, meaning you're fully committed that this is the path that you're going to move forward on, you're never going to go through the effort of actually figuring out how. But once you make that decision, you'll find that things start falling into place. You still have to take the action, obviously, but all of a sudden your mind is going to go to work on how, because you've already made the decision of if and that you are. So let's make that decision right now. Are you ready to get started? And the answer is, usually yes at this point. Yes, they're ready to get started. Now, obviously, at that point, if they have any objections, those objections are going to come up. And please understand that those objections are not no's. Those objections are simply concerns that you have the opportunity now to address. So after you address those objections, which we could do on another training, obviously, we could talk about the different objections and, and have that conversation. After you've addressed those objections, though, and they say, yes, I'm ready to get started, then we say, well, if I can show you how to find the funding, do you want to get started today? Do you want to start step one, where we set up your account? You guys know there's a 3-step process. First step is set up your account. Second step is find the funding. Third step is unlock your education. So if we can, if we can figure this out, do you want to get started today? Yes. Okay. Let me share with you the way that I see most people find their funding. And so I'm just going to show you some of the most common ways. Is that okay? And you're asking these questions, by the way, guys. When I'm saying this, I want you to know that I'm asking these questions. How about I show you the way that most people find the funding? Is that okay? Yes. Okay, great. What I've found is those sources of funding come in 3 different categories. So the first category is personal resources. So here's what I want to do before I jump into these options, Mr. Potential Student. I want to let you know that in my group and specifically with me, I can talk for myself. There's pretty much any 4-letter word that you can say. You can use just about any language when you're hanging out with me. It's no big deal. I was a steel worker. I've heard it all. I may not use it on a frequent basis, but it's totally up to you, the language you use. But there is one 4-letter word that really kind of it turns my skin. It makes me feel uncomfortable. And you'll find that me and almost all of my successful friends inside and outside of Renatus can't stand this word. And this word is can't. So here's what I want to do. Before I start sharing all this, let's just get that off the table. There is no I can't. And I don't want you to think about this from the perspective of the way that you have been thinking about your finances in the past, right? So can't is off the table. We're not going to use that word. And the other thing is, some of these things may seem like they don't relate to you right now, but by the time we get to the bottom and we really brainstorm some of these, you'll see how they could tie in. So before you make any judgments on these things, let's just go through it and do a little brainstorm. How does that sound? And I've got somebody off mute. Let me go ahead and, all right, you got yourself. Thank you. Got a chat real quick. Can't stand the word can't. Thank you, Anthony. All right, so we're not going to think about the word can't, and I don't want you to prejudge any of these options until we get to the end, and then we can talk about what makes sense for you. How does that sound? Sounds great. Okay. So personal resources include things like, well, you may have it in like cash, or you may have it in so cash may be in the form of a checking account, a savings account. It could be a money market account. And, we've had individuals that when they have the cash, oftentimes that's the fastest way to get started. In fact, we had an individual that was looking to join the team, and they had all this money sitting in their savings account. When they saw the velocity banking strategy, and when they realized that they were actually losing money by holding that money in a savings account because they were earning less than 1% in their savings account, and yet inflation is going up at over 3%. They were able to just simply write a check and get started immediately. And in fact, that's one of the fastest ways to get to that third step of unlocking your education. is and having access to it for life is just pay, with money that you already have. So cash is one option. Now, sometimes that cash might not be in a checking or savings or money market account. It is your money, but you've been taught that it's not your money because it might be in some type of a retirement account. So we had another individual that they realized that they had money sitting in the retirement account. That money was actually losing them money, and when they really did the math on how much they could pay in interest by borrowing that money somewhere else and doing those things, versus if they just pulled that money out of their retirement account and actually paid off their truck, that this was their strategy that they chose to do. They pulled the money out of the retirement account. They paid off their truck. They also paid for their education. And then they used that new cash flow that they were no longer paying on that high interest loan to start using the velocity banking strategy. They actually put themselves ahead of the game by simply using that. Now, that's one way, but what we've found is many people, of course, don't want to pay fees and penalties. And the truth is, your retirement account is your money. And there's many times ways to access that money without having to take fees or penalties, right? There's many ways that you can actually access that, and you can pay yourself back with interest directly into your retirement account. So it'll really depend on whether it's a 401k or an IRA, but just know that this is an option that many people have used to be able to get access to the funds. Now, for some people, they might not have it sitting in a checking, savings, or retirement account, but they may have already put that money to work somewhere else that they're not getting the return that they want. So this would be things like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, precious metals, right? Those precious metals could be, gold, silver. It might even be in like Bitcoin, right? And they're saying, oh, it's going to come back. It's going to come back. Or any other type of cryptocurrency. Now, here's the interesting thing: is many times, especially if you have some type of a financial planner or somebody managing that money, they want to hold on to those funds. So they're going to say things like, "You don't lose money until you sell. It's only down for now, right?" And the truth is, if there's been a loss, that is a loss, and it would take a new gain in order for that investment to pay you back. And I actually had my first mentor in this industry. His name was Chad Wade, and he actually affected the life of tens of thousands of people. He was making millions of dollars a year when I started working with him. And he was in this position where him and his family had been sold this hot stock tip back when he was still working in the back of a dry cleaner. And he had all this money tied up because this, medical company was gonna, go big. But the fact of the matter is, him and all his family had seen losses. And they had been told, well, you don't lose money unless you sell. And, all of these things. And the truth, and the fact of the matter is, if you think about it, if you have a 50% loss in an investment, in order to just get back to where you were, you would need 100% gain. And when Chad looked at that math, and when he really thought about, where he was at and what type of gain he would need, he decided, you know what? I need to go out there and be the influencer on my retirement account, the influencer on my investments. And real estate is the best place for me to do that. So what he did was he actually just sold off those stocks that he had. And that's how he got started in the business and invested in his own education. Now, obviously, that paid off wondrously for him. He made millions and millions of dollars because he now was in control. The thing about most investments of traditional type is you don't have the ability to influence them, at least not legally, right? And you don't want to end up in prison like some of the people that you've seen that have done some of those things. So personal resources. Again, it could be cash, it could be a retirement account, it could be stocks, bonds, mutual fund, it could be anything else, anywhere else that you might have those funds. In fact, another place that it might be sitting that many people don't even think about is it might be in a life insurance policy. So many people have cash value inside a life insurance policy that they didn't even realize that they could tap into. And not only could they tap into it, but they could tap into it many times tax-free, and they could pay their life insurance policy back at their own pace. And not only could they pay it back at their own pace, but if they don't pay it back, then it ultimately just comes out of their death benefit. Now, there's a lot of intricacies depending on what type of life insurance policy that you have and whether this is possible. But here's the interesting thing that happened in Hawaii. We had a big event. There was a young kid there. I think he was probably 18 years old. Maybe 20 at the oldest. He didn't have a lot of resources. Let's put it that way. He was kind of still just getting out of trying to get away from family and out on his own. And he saw this as his path, and, so much hope based on what he was seeing and the success that people were having. And as we were going through these different options, he thought about it, and his grandma had actually told him that she put a life insurance policy on him when he was a baby, and that, she was making sure that she was paying that because it was something that she wanted him to have when he became an adult. And so he started thinking about it, and he went back to grandma, talked to her, and said, what kind of policy is it? And it turns out that it was one of these, and I believe it was a whole life policy. It was one of these policies that had a cash value. In fact, it had enough of a cash value that he was able to get started with his education. And so those are some ideas on personal resources. All right. So that's one idea. And you can probably think of more personal resources options, but this is just, a start. All we're doing is brainstorming here. So the next category that we're going to talk about, and actually I'll just leave it the same color. The next story we're going to talk about is traditional credit. Now, traditional credit, this is going to be dependent on your credit score and, financial outlook and some other things. But traditional credit is going to be things that you can probably think about. In fact, the one that is most commonly thought about is oftentimes also the most misunderstood. Now, here in Utah, especially, we're a very conservative culture. And so this one scares some people. Credit cards. So credit cards. Now, here's the thing about credit cards. They're not evil. They don't enslave you. They are simply a tool. How you use them will determine whether or not they are a positive or a negative in your life. And so with credit cards, you just got to think of it from that point. How are you going to use this tool? Just like a hammer can be used, to put up a wall, it can also be used as a blunt object against somebody's skull. So how you use it is going to depend on whether it's good or whether it's bad. And credit cards are one of the most beneficial, lenient, amazing tools when it comes to traditional credit. I mean, think about it. What other form of credit do you know of that you could get approved for instantly, that you could get 0% interest, that you could have it delivered to you within 10 days. In fact, sometimes you can actually request the card number immediately, so you can get immediate access to that cash. Not only can you get 0%, but many times people are able to get paid to use those cards. Frequent flyer miles, or cash back, or all of these things. There's many people, including myself, that use credit cards in a way where they're not paying interest, and in fact, they're actually getting paid from the credit card companies. And so we've seen many people be able to use this as their start into velocity banking as well, because a credit card is a line of credit. And if you think about the velocity curve, when you're using a 0% interest line, that just speeds up the quickness that you could pay things down. So one of there's a couple stories that I'll share with you with this. So Dane Clark, you probably heard about in our 4 Pillars event. Dane took a credit card, and he actually used some relationships that we had within our community to go get access to $30,000 in 0% lines of credit. And what he did with that was he took $20,000 and bought his education, and and then he took another $5,000 and paid off his car. So he increased his cash flow. Within 10 months, he paid off that entire line, that entire new line, and used those same lines of credit to invest in his first duplex. So that's one idea. But another idea I'll throw at you is John O'Neill. So John, when he was first starting, he had put himself in a position where he had been able to fix his credit since the 2008 downturn. For him, it was a double whammy. Not only did business dry up, but he had to fly to the mainland, let's call it. He was living in Hawaii. He had to fly here to Utah and take care of his son who had been very sick. And so he had really gotten wiped out in the 08 crash, but he had gotten his credit reestablished. And I don't know that his credit was harmed so much, but he had really been able to preserve that. And so he had the credit, but he didn't necessarily have the extra income to pay for a new payment. So what John did was he got enough credit cards to where he was able to pay for the $20,000 education. But then what he did was off of these credit cards, he took another $5,000 and he deposited it into a checking account. And what he did with this $5,000 was he actually paid the payments on the full $25,000 new credit that he had put onto his credit cards. And so by putting aside that $5,000, John gave himself 2.5 years worth of payments. Meaning, if this didn't work for a full 2.5 years, he wasn't going to come out of pocket in that time. And it gave him the freedom, the mental freedom, to just go after it. Now, I'll tell you, he didn't need 2.5 years. In fact, John cleared over $1 million in his first 2 years in the business. And so he did very, very well for himself between real estate and between the business. And, what he needed, though, was that peace of mind. And so credit cards, again, just an option. There's creative ways that you can use credit cards for velocity banking and for paying for things, and even for covering payments on themselves, during the process of getting started. So credit cards is one option. Now, another option might be an auto loan. Some people have equity in their car. Maybe they paid off their car when they refinanced their house before they realized, what they were doing of stretching out, a 5-year loan into 30 years, with amortized interest and, and all these things. We only act in what we know. And sometimes people have done these things where they've either paid off their car or maybe they just paid it down very quickly and they have equity in their car. Well, one of the most aggressive lending options out there is the auto loan industry. And this was part of the way that I funded my education. I took a loan against my car, took a loan against my bullet bike. I raised the limit on a credit card, and I took out an unsecured loan at like 18% interest. So I just did whatever I had to do, and it was the best decision that I ever made. But an auto loan, many times there's lenders out there right now that will lend up to 125% of the value of the car, right? It's one of the most aggressive, lending instruments, meaning they're wanting to loan on auto loans because they have the security of being able to take that car back. And on top of that, because it's very competitive, oftentimes you can get very low rates for an auto loan. So that's just one idea, one way that other people have been able to fund their education. Now, if it's not an auto loan, it might be some type of a secured loan. Now, if it's a secured loan, this could be against like a boat, a four-wheeler, an RV, something of that sort, something that you can put up as collateral, and that falls into the same idea as an auto loan. Is they'll lend up to a certain percentage. Now, it's probably not going to be as much on a secured loan versus an auto loan. But still, if there's equity there, people have been able to tap into the equity of the things that they have and use that as a way to get started. Now, if you have great credit and you have a good standing history, with a lending institution, many times you don't necessarily need to do the secured loan. You could actually do an unsecured loan or unsecured line of credit. And in fact, a line of credit, of course, is oftentimes going to be the one that is more beneficial. So you've got to look at that and what the options are. And if they'll give you an unsecured loan, it's likely that they may also give you a unsecured line of credit at very similar cost. And so many people have used this to where all they had to do was simply go into their bank. They used their good name and their credit score, and they were able to get funded that way. The next thing would be a home equity line of credit. So we've seen many people that once they see all of these options and ideas, and they start realizing with what velocity banking they can do, they start seeing that a home equity line of credit is just a really, really big line of credit. So from a velocity banking standpoint, it gives them a bigger tool to work with. And so what I had with one guy is, what they did is they came in and they started the process. They actually went to the same bank, and the bank said, they would use the same credit report for, everything that they were trying to do for up to 60 days. So they had 60 days. And so what they did was they went and applied for their home equity line of credit. And then at the same time, they turned around and they went out there and applied for credit cards. And so as the process, because a home equity line of credit is it can oftentimes be a long process. It could be 3 weeks. It could be a month. If you as an individual take a long time of getting the paperwork that they need, it could be stretched out even longer than that. And so they obviously wanted to get that access to their education immediately. But they also wanted this big line of credit. So what they did was they went and applied for the home equity line of credit first. And by doing that, they was able to pull their credit report where their current standing was. And then once that process was started, then they turned around and they went in, they also applied for credit cards. And by doing so, they actually got access to almost $30,000 in lines of credit through their credit card. And a month later, when everything finalized with their HELOC, then they actually did a first position HELOC. So they rolled their whole entire mortgage into a HELOC. They were able to take the money from their HELOC, pay off those credit cards. And just within a matter of a couple of months, all of those credit cards that they had just barely gotten started offering them credit line increases. And why did they do that? Because they started building a relationship. They started showing a positive way of utilizing their credit. And what you'll find is with banks, when they see that you're using debt properly, they want to give you more of it. The last thing you want to do is be out there trying to apply for credit when you need the money, when you can't afford to pay for it, because banks don't want to lend to people who need the money. They want to lend to people who know how to use the money productively. So that's what they did to start showing positive, credit usage. And they've continued to build since then to where obviously they have their HELOC, they have their credit cards, they flow their money through these lines of credit, and they're able to pay off debt and do those things that way. So that's what they've done. All right, so personal resource and traditional credit, you can probably think of more traditional credit options and things that you can, lend against. I mentioned like a bullet bike and those types of things. If you have something secured, or if you have ways of getting unsecured lines of credit, there is actually one more I'll throw on here, and that is, let's just put it down here, a business line of credit. If you have a business that has been in business for a certain period of time, and you've been able to run income through there and do different things, sometimes you can actually get funding against your business. All right. So last thing would be getting creative. And I actually really like talking about this category, because what I've found is many times the people who have to stretch the furthest are the ones who go the furthest. I mean, if you think about it, if somebody has to kind of lay it all out on the line, and they have to, just do anything and everything in order to get started, they're more likely to follow through. Would you agree with me on that? And I've definitely seen that. I mean, I feel like I was one of those options. I did not think there was a way. And once I made the decision that I was going to do this, because somebody had this same talk with me of you have to make the decision that you're going to do it and then figure out the how. Once I made that decision that I was going to do this, then it's like things started falling into place. Now, they really didn't, because I had to make the effort. I had to go out. I remember back then we didn't have a lot of the tools that we have now. I'll talk to you about some of the, the supporting options that we have as far as relationships that can help with traditional credit and things like that. And so what I did was I actually, back then, this is 14, 15 years ago now, I printed off my credit report and I actually started going into banks and said, and I only needed like $3,500 because the first part was easy, getting an auto loan and a loan against my bullet bike and those things. It was pretty standard, going to I was going to the bank that I already had a relationship with. But I felt like I was maxed out there. So I had them print off my credit report because legally anybody who pulls your credit, if you ask for it, needs to give you your credit report. So I printed that off and I started going into banks. Would you give me a loan? Would you give me a loan? Would you give me a loan? I got turned down 10 times in one day driving around to different banks. I was pretty beat up by it. But finally I went back to my original credit union, the ones who gave me all the other loans. And I just said, is there anything you can do for me? I'm so close, and I just need that extra $3,500. And as I talked to them and they clicked through their computer, they're like, oh yeah, well, we do actually have this unsecured loan that we could do for you, but we didn't really want to talk to you about that because it's high interest and we didn't think that you would want to pay, almost 18% interest. And so, we decided not to go to share with you that, but it is an option. And I was like, I'll take it, give it to me, right? And so when you have that determination that you're going to do whatever it takes, oftentimes that same determination is going to show up in your business and you're going to do whatever it takes to succeed. So I'll give you some ideas, some options. One of the things you can do is you can just sell stuff. Many of us are cluttered our whole life with things that we barely use and that we don't need. And sometimes we only bought to impress people who don't really care. And, there's the extreme of this. And I'll share with you an example. Actually, when I was first going through that process I just shared with you of how I was going from bank to bank, one of the things that kept me motivated was a lady that I had met as I was making this decision to get started. And, what she did was she was a single mom. She had 2 sons. And she was living in a 1-bedroom house. And it was actually my mentor, Chad, that is the one that introduced her to this business. And when he introduced her, he's like, she's probably not a good option, but I committed to myself that I'm going to tell everybody. But I know her situation, and I know, that she doesn't have a lot as far as resources. And when she saw it, she said, I'm in. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Like, you're gonna pay $197 and try and sell this, or what are you trying to do? And she's like, no, I'm all in. She said, give me some time. I just got to figure this out. Give me some time. I'll be back. What he didn't know is what she did was immediately she went home and she started selling all of her stuff. She sold her jewelry. She sold her beds. She sold her couches. She sold everything that she had of value at that time. She sold. Now, obviously, it was because she had the belief that this was going to help her get it all back, right? And more. She actually moved out of that 1-bedroom house and she went and lived with her mom in 1 bedroom of a house. So instead of having, a space for her and her boys, she had 1 bedroom living with her mom again as an adult. And she sold everything that she had. She was able to get all of the funding to get started and get her education. And 2 years later is when I had met her. 2 years later, it was, she had over $5 million in real estate. She actually had went back and bought that little 1-bedroom home from the landlord that she used to rent from. And she kept onto it as a rental for herself, as a reminder of where she came from. She didn't live there, but she bought it and kept it as a rental, just as a reminder of where she came from. So sometimes, you can just take an inventory. And, this is what many people have done is they take an inventory and they just started selling stuff. And they were able to get access to the funding that way. I actually know a guy who sold his car, a car that it was a classic car, an Impala that he had been building. His name's Rudy. He's out in Arizona. And a classic car he had been building since high school. But he had never finished it. And this was the wake-up call in his mind. is I've been, working so hard to just scrape by and get enough money for something here and something there to build this car. And yes, it is my dream car. And yes, I'm invested in it. But the fact of the matter is, if I invest in my education in my future, I'll be able to go buy the car that I want. And, so that's what Rudy did. Is he just sold, this classic car that he had. So getting creative. All right. So if it's not selling stuff, sometimes you have something that is more what do you call it? It's tied to you in a way that you're not willing to let it go, right? It's significant to you in that way. And so you're not willing to sell it, but maybe you would be willing to borrow against it. And this is what happened to Jazz out in California. Is Jazz saw this as a way for him to get started. He didn't have much that he could sell, but he did. Really the only thing that he had of value, I actually got to listen to him on our founders webinar that I get to announce on Mondays. And he talked about the only thing he really had of value was a ring that was given to him by his late uncle. His late uncle was kind of a mentor to him. And so this ring meant so much, but it was also worth a lot of money. And so he wasn't willing to let it go, but he was willing to go borrow against it because he saw this as the path for him that was going to set him free. So he went to work. I don't know if he went to a pawn shop or if he went to a jewelry store, whatever it was. He basically hawked this ring. And then he went to work. And I believe it was 6 months in, he had his first $50,000 payout from a real estate deal. And within 6 months from that first deal, he had a second payout of another $50,000 deal. Now, one was slightly under and one was slightly under, one was slightly over. He just talked about the fact that he went from not even being able to pay his bills to becoming a six-figure income earner in a 12-month period of time. And it was because he went out there and got after it because he was not going to lose that ring. Now, obviously, after the very first deal, he went and got his ring back, right? So that's an option that he used. And then the last one is that I'm going to talk about anyways is what we call private money. Now, private money, I usually put a little heart here because it's actually love money most of the time. Now, that's nothing weird. Don't worry. When I talk about love money, is it's usually somebody that loves you and cares enough about you that they want to see you succeed, right? And so when you go to them, here's the thing. Do not go to them. Even if they would give you the money, don't go to them and ask them to borrow you $20,000 or $30,000 or whatever it is you're going to ask for, right? Because what they hear when you say, can I borrow, is can I have, right? And again, even if they would give it to you, there's not a good feeling within that. And it doesn't really start it off on the right track. And the fact of the matter is, if these are people that could, ultimately lend you the money to get started in the business, they're oftentimes the same people that could lend you money on real estate. And they could be your private lenders on real estate transactions, and you could create a huge win-win. And so that's what you want to do, is you want to tap into that win-win scenario. You want to think about the radio station that everyone wants to listen to, which is WIIFM. What's in it for me? And so that's what you want to talk to them about, is what's in it for them. And so when you go to them, grandma, grandpa, Aunt Sally, Uncle Tom, mom, dad, brother Larry, sis, hey sis, whoever you're talking to, when you go to them and you say, listen, cousin, I'm looking at getting started in real estate. In fact, I'm choosing this as my career path moving forward. And I've got a great group that I'm going to work with, and I believe that they're going to be able to guide me along the way, to where I can really improve my financial situation and put myself in an amazing spot of financial freedom. And the thing is, all I need to do is I need to have the same education as them in order to feel like that I'm going to succeed the way that they are and be guided properly. And so what I'm wondering is, I don't want to borrow $30,000. What I'm wondering, Aunt Sally, is would you be willing to lend me $20,000 or $30,000 preferably so I can get some marketing started and stuff. If I could show you a way that it could pay you more than what you're paying on that money now, or what that money would cost you, is that something that you'd be open to doing? And then it's just a discovery process. And so, I always think of Caleb, in this situation, student of mine here locally, where he was introduced to me by somebody else, and he was kind of looking at this business, and he didn't really have much as far as the resources of getting started. And, I actually ran into him one day as I was, it was late at night, and I was getting food, and he ended up walking over and saying, "Hey man." And I just said, "Hey, are you getting started with this? What's going on?" And he said, I'm getting started, but I think I'm just going to have to start at the lowest common denominator. I'm just going to have to pay like $550 and then work my way up from there. And we got to talking a little bit more. And I said, well, is there anybody that you can think of that, that would have the money, that would be willing to help you get started? And he's like, well, the only person I could think of is my grandma. And, quite frankly, she's lent a lot of people in the family money in the past, and they've never paid her back. She's actually lent me money in the past, and I haven't been able to pay her back. And I just don't know if I want to go that route. I don't want to be that guy that's taking advantage of my grandma, And I said, well, Caleb, if you've done that, if this is really the case, why not go to her now and go to her in a way where not only can you pay her back, but you could actually, give her, a benefit from it. You could actually make it a business proposition where she's going to end up ahead of the game, maybe even pay her back for everything that you've ever borrowed from her in the past. And that was the mental shift that he needed, that he was like, okay, this isn't me taking advantage of grandma. This is actually me making a beneficial, situation for grandma, for her to be able to start winning. And when he talked to her, she had the money, she actually had the money up here in, the stock market. And so she just brought it down here. She actually borrowed him $30,000. Now he actually told her, I'm willing to write a business plan. I'm willing to do this. And she had him do it. She said, yeah, Caleb, write up the business plan. I want to see it. And he said that this whole situation actually brought their relationship closer than it's ever been, because she would call him every couple of weeks, and she would say, hey, Caleb, how's my little business proposition going? And he would be able to talk to her and share with her kind of what's going on in the business and what he had been learning and those types of things. And when Caleb started flipping notes and he was also started, enrolling people in the education, he started succeeding, and he told grandma, hey, grandma, I'm ready to pay you back. And she said, oh no, Caleb, that's my play money. Don't pay me back. Just keep making those interest payments. And so, for her, she didn't even want to be paid back anymore. So he's been, thinking of ways that he could include her on deals rather than, keep paying on this loan from his education. But that's just one idea. That's just one person. And there's so many other scenarios like this. I remember way back in the day, there was a kid out in Chicago, and he was young, and he went to his aunt, and she didn't have the money, but she was able to get a second mortgage on her home. And he said, I'll pay you back she was getting the loan at 4 or 5%. I think it was 5%. He said, I'll pay you back at 8%, and I'll make you a 25% partner in my first 2 real estate transactions. So huge win-win scenario that he was able to create there. There's other things that can be done where I've seen people actually say, I'll tell you what, this education comes with learning partner access. I'll give you learning partner access, and I'll pay back, 3/4 of the education. You only pay 25%. Or I'll tell you what, I'll pay back all the education, and if you just front the money, up front, and we can do it that way. So there's a lot of ideas of the ways that people have done this. I've shared with you now 3 different types, and let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, a dozen different ways that I've seen other people fund their education. Let me ask you, Mr. Prospect, after looking at all this and thinking about all this, which option do you feel like makes most sense for you? By the way, if it goes silent like this, you got to live in that silence. You got to get comfortable with that silence. You got to love that silence. Because if it's silent, they're thinking. They're considering what options. Now, sometimes they'll just spit something out, right? And then you can talk about, okay, well, tell me, what's going to be your next step? When should we talk again? Remember, I'm more of a guide than anything. So I want to be here to hold you accountable to getting to day one. So let me just, let's just create a plan from here. What's going to be your next step? When should we follow up next? And then just continue on that path. And when they say, hey, I went here and I was able to get this much, but I don't have quite enough, say, okay, great. Let's look at those options again. What's going to be your next step? And they're going to continue to go out there and find the funding. And that's where you're at. You're a guide. You're not telling them, do this. You're not saying, jump over this chasm here and climb this ledge over there. You're not doing any of that. You're just saying, hey, here's the options. And here's the ways that other people have went. Here's the path. In fact, here's the path that I walked. Which path are you going to take? And then when they give you their word they're going to do something, just follow up with them. Just continue to follow up with them, guide them along this process. All right, I've got a couple of chats in here real quick. Let me just type in. All right, perfect. Peter told me that he was going to report to once he's done. And I appreciate you sending that to me. That's actually a private message, but I appreciate those of you guys who are on here and follow up with me when you see me in person and say, hey, this is what I've been doing, and here's what action I've taken based off of what you have taught me. And that really gives me a lot. It fuels me when I know that you guys are creating success. So Peter, I see your other comment there. Anthony, thank you, brother. Appreciate you. Rick, you're the man. It's great to see you over the weekend. And Anthony, I remember you let me hang out at your house. I was able to do a follow-up while you were right there. That was awesome. All right, guys, I'm going to end the call here. If I can do anything for any of you, please reach out to me. Love you all. Go succeed. It's Thriving Thursday. It's your turn to thrive.